has another engagement this evening. We're going to go and do discussion items first this evening so we can allow those people who to leave as necessary, as we have kind of a lengthy agenda otherwise. First item on discussions is nuisance inspections. Eric?
I'm going to go through a brief overview. Wasn't quite sure, I guess, what wanted out of this, so you can definitely ask any questions or interrupt if you feel the need as we go through this. But just going to go over a brief overview of nuisance inspections and what we do and process we go through. Matt Amanel and Craig Robinson are here as well, our nuisance and rental inspectors. So falls under Chapter 163 of the City Code. This is just the opening definition, whatever is injurious to the senses or an obstruction of free use of property to interfere with the comfortable enjoyment of life property declared to be a nuisance. We have actually nuisances designated within the code. The code does state creation or maintenance of a nuisance is prohibited. And then nuisance designated, this is chapter 163.03, a list of 29 things, substances, acts, or conditions that are declared nuisances under our city code. Again, it's not a limiting list, but it goes through pretty clearly what we look for and what we consider a nuisance. Some of the common ones are obstruction placed on a street, alley, or public ground, depositing of junk and refuse, noxious weeds and grass, brush, and growth over 8 inches in height. That was one of the changes a few years ago, was reducing the height, I believe, from 12 inches to 8 inches. Improperly registered and operable legally parked vehicles, decayed, diseased, or dying trees, dealing with a lot of ash trees now. Also seems to be quite a few maples. Detached garages and fences must be structurally sound and in good repair. That's one we've targeted a little bit over the summer and continue to work on. With exterior surfaces, stairways, decks, etc. So the most common nuisances, keeping of junk and refuse, kind of gives a holistic view of what that includes. Again, not all inclusive, but gives a pretty good idea of what is considered junk and refuse. Some examples of some of the larger cases that we've come across. Tall grass and weeds over 8 inches in height. We have an annual, it seems, mow list throughout the summer where we notify them at the beginning of the summer, and they're unresponsive and just continue to mow every 2 weeks or as necessary throughout the summer, and those are problem areas that we encounter. Also kind of raises some red flags. Some of those turn out to be abandoned houses that we eventually go through the court system and acquire. One of the triggers that lets us know maybe we need to look into this a little bit more, and maybe it is an abandoned house, and that's one of the red flags that raises in our department to look into that a little bit more.
That leads me to a question, Eric.
Mm-hmm.
So when we mow, then the property owner gets assessed and they don't pay, so it goes to assessed to their tax bill?
Yep.
And they don't pay, so how do we pay for it ourselves in the meantime?
We, under our budget, under the building administration, we have a miscellaneous technical services. I think typically around $35,000 annually is budgeted in that fund that we pay our contractor to clean up and abate nuisances. That's just a normal line item under our building code administration.
And is that enough?
It kind of determines what we do. If we want to do more, if we were to expand into property conditions, siding, roofing, demolishing maybe more accessory structures, it wouldn't be enough for our staff and our time. The grass and junk, it has been right around that amount each year. We have increased it. That's where the ash trees have come out of the last few years. That
Okay.
was bumped up over 100,000. But
Do property owners ever pay the bill?
yes, we get some that pay. We send out the letter. They pay before it comes to council for assessment. Not a lot, but we get 2 or 3 each time, maybe.
That's a small percent, though.
Yeah, yeah. Eventually, that lot, well, not a lot, but some pay, I think we collect around 30,000 annually that pay their property, through their property tax bills. So I don't know if it's 10 to 15,000 annually or shortfall that they don't pay one way or another.
Thank you.
Vehicles, another one of the ones that we look for. Ash trees, this is one we've tried to get the word out quite a bit over the last couple of years. From the city standpoint, the park standpoint, on the right-of-ways and parks, we're very near the end of having to deal with those, but kind of towards the beginning of dealing with the private ash trees. Accessory structures, we've tried to make some time to target some of these over the summer. Haven't gotten around to all the areas we'd like, but started on that process of dealing with some of the accessory structures that are dilapidated. One thing, I guess, has been talked about, looking at accessory structures and appearance issues. We're able to deal with those on the primary structure appearance in the rental process, whether it's scrape and paint or doing some minor repairs to the exterior appearance, but have not addressed the owner-occupied home appearance issues to date. Part of that is cost and budget. Part of it's staff time and getting into owner-occupied personal property issues hasn't been something, I guess, we've gotten into it to date, but that may be a discussion down the road to look at as well.
I think that's a good discussion to have.
The nuisance penalty, the most common is through nuisance abatement. It's from staff perspective, I guess, most timely, abates the nuisance in a more timely manner and less staff time to do it, even though there is quite a bit of staff time dealing with that as well. The fees that have been associated with that is set by council. For the first offense for a nuisance abatement that the city abates is $100. For each subsequent offense, it's $200. That gets added on to the abatement. Whether it's a $100 mowing, if it's the second time, they're getting charged a $200 fee each and every time after that. So the fees can add up, and hope that was a deterrent. It might have been in some cases. Don't think it was on a whole. A look from a big picture, we still have quite a few nuisances, so it hasn't quite deterred as many as we'd like. We may also file a municipal infraction against the property owner. This can result in fines up to $750 for the first infraction and $1,000 each day that it continues. We've gone through municipal infraction on a few different instances for gravel driveways. The resident at 721 Washington Street with tent and debris, very lengthy time frame, setting up court hearings, sometimes involving an attorney, can be more costly than just the abatement process. So from a staff time perspective, it can be a timely process of going through the court system, but also just the length of time from initial notification to the actual hearing can be 2 to 3 months, so it does take a little more time than actual abatement. Just overview of staffing, we have 2 full-time nuisance inspection staff. They complete all nuisance and rental inspections. End of fiscal year 2016, we received 1,360 complaints within our department. And we had, for nuisances, and we had 1,376 total units inspected from a rental housing standpoint, which were contained in 563 buildings. So that's all handled by, primarily all handled by our 2 staff here. We have 1 full-time office staff, the project manager that completes all office work for development and parks, includes permits, inspections, planning, park recreation, et cetera. So a lot of the field staff duties from our nuisance and inspection staff have shifted to completing their own paperwork in many instances in the past. As we've gone through a lot of the budgets, like a lot of the other departments had some reductions. We did have 2 clerical staff in the development department and 1 in the parks department, and now it's 1 full-time covering both of those. So a lot of the paperwork has shifted on to individual staff members, and that takes up a lot of time as well, which reduces the amount of time out in the field that we're able to accomplish. Some of the issues we see with nuisances is kind of the balance of structure versus situation. We're dealing with individuals on a daily basis. We're dealing with personal situations, neighbor disputes, personal perspectives on standards. One owner may feel the grass should be mowed at 4 inches and the weeds should all be trimmed neatly each week, and the other owner lets it get 5 or 6 inches. And so we deal with kind of your own personal perspective a lot of times on complaints or neighborhood issues, or depending on the neighborhood you're in. Timing of issues, being able to get out to a nuisance, we get a complaint, whether we have time to get out immediately that day or the following day, how much time is given to clean up a nuisance issue depends on the type of nuisance it is and sometimes the situation, and then other commitments that we have.
How often are rental inspections done?
It's scheduled on a daily basis. There may be, some days you may not have any, some days you may have the entire day booked for a multi-unit apartment complex.
I mean, how many years between inspections?
It's for single-family and duplex, it's 5 years. For multifamily, it's every 3 years.
Thank you.
This is just a general overview. Obviously, it varies depending on the situation and I guess degree, but on average, trash try to abate within 1 to 2 days. Tall grass and weeds 3 to 5, junk 5 to 14, trees and vehicles 30 to 60 days. And then on the right-hand column, kind of gives a general indication of what percentage of our nuisances are each of these categories. So some instances it may be a quicker requirement. Some instances it may be a little bit longer, but just a general typical time frame for abatement. The abatement process really funnels through our 2 staff here, just to go through what a typical process might be for an individual nuisance complaint. Receive a complaint, whether it be a phone call, email, someone stopping by the office. Sometimes those conversations are 1 minute, sometimes they're 20 minutes talking about what the issue may be, what issues are going on with that individual or in their neighborhood. Doing a site inspection to verify the issue, send a notice to a violator with a time frame to abate, whether it's personal contact, posting, or a letter. Follow up to verify that the nuisance has or has not been abated. Contact or meet with the contractor, depending on the nuisance there, to abate the nuisance, going over what junk or debris is classified as a nuisance or where the property is. And then after it has been abated, completing the forms on the abatement for the council resolution, getting our paperwork in order. So one instance can take up to 1.5 hours from beginning to end. Sometimes it can be quicker if you have multiple nuisances in one neighborhood or if you're out on a rental inspection and see something, but just to give an example of what it can take to do one nuisance, it can take up to 1.5 hours. And as I mentioned, we had 1,360 complaints. 946 were abated by the property owner in FY16. 403 were abated by city contractor and submitted to the city council for approval for a lien against the property in FY16. So that's just a general overview of what we do. We try and get information out through our website. We have a How Do I section on our city website where people can report complaints through our website now, where we get an email once they submit that. We do get a lot of phone calls, a lot of drop-ins. We get people stopping in periodically throughout the day or week, and a lot of times they're not in the office because they're on rental inspections or nuisance inspections. So sometimes people are frustrated that they're not in the office, or if they stop by and they are in their office, they're frustrated they're not out on a nuisance complaint. So we get both ends of that. But that's just a brief overview. Again, not quite, just wanted to give you some background on what we do and be able to answer any questions you may have. Or
It just seems to me, because of our limited staff, when I drive around this town, I can't believe the quote nuisances I see. And it isn't because these guys aren't doing their job, there's so many of them. And I know when we try to attract people to our community, as an employers and what have you, and you tour people around, I know there are people that wonder, why do we tolerate some of the stuff that we do? I know it's a budget item, but still, it seems too bad that we have so much of it. I think what you do, you do well, by the way. I have no complaint with what they're doing. It's just the quantity. I mean, it's,
Based on what we do and how we do it, I wonder if there's, as we approach budget time, if we can't look at some of the things that we do, like the every 3-year inspection of multifamily units, that maybe we can extend that to the 5-year like the other single-family and duplexes. With the idea that if those become a problem, that they go into a forced early inspection or something. I said sometimes they schedule a day or 2 days to go through these multifamily units. And then we may want to look at getting ahead at some point and at budget time, and maybe not this coming year, but in the near future, and looking at increasing that budget and finding the money for it, and
Yeah.
getting the nuisance abated and getting them paid for, and maybe becoming a little harder and taking a little harder approach on some of them.
Yeah,
And, the right-of-way issue, you've heard me complain about it for years, and it's not getting any better. And I know they're working harder at it, but too many people have seen now that it's easy to abuse the right-of-ways, and we just don't have the staff, the manpower, the time to take care of it. And the only way to address it is to create that manpower.
yep.
And I guess I've wondered for a few years too, if we need a stricter code or more teeth into the code so there's more penalty, or actually a civil violation involved, go to court for hazard abatement issues. But that's something else. I don't know if anybody thinks that it works, but I know there are cities that do have rather
Oh, yeah.
very much more stringent codes.
Yes.
I feel like the codes are okay, but maybe the penalties aren't as severe enough to deter. I think that's really what the issue is.
Anything else here, Council? I hear the same thing that you just said.
Yeah.
Councilman Fleming, more than once. Yeah. Questions? You guys have anything you want to add? Come to the mic,
inspections.
Craig, come to the microphone.
The rental inspection is going from like a multi, anything above a duplex, taking that to a 5-year. That worries me because a lot of things can happen just within 3 years in a 6-plex or a 30-plex, whatever.
Yeah.
There's so much more that can happen, and if you extend it to 5 years, it can become a real mess. Yeah, you have rental complaints that you can go in and inspect on those. However, I just think the 5-year for multis would be, anything above duplex would be
Yeah.
way too long.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else? Okay.
Good.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, guys. Thanks for all you do.
Thank you.
All right, the next item on our discussion is ordinance regarding fire pits, and this has been brought up by a citizen who is requesting us to look at the code to see if there's something that can be done health-wise.
Thank you very much.
Chief, are you going to lead us off on this discussion?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so what I gave you there is what we give to the citizens when they come or they have questions about recreational fires. It's not the actual code, but it's a lot easier to read than our wording in our code, so, I guess. I put that myself in there. So, is there, I think maybe everybody except for maybe Councilman Wilson was here when we adopted the recreational fires. Okay, I can't remember who was here when, but September 2nd of 2014 is when we started allowing recreational fires here in Burlington. It was not something that I think was on council's radar or on my radar. It was brought up during a meeting and the comment time. So I did some research and we came up with some rules based on what the International Fire Code has, and then also what other communities in Iowa do. They're very similar, our rules. If anybody has recreational fires, the rules are very similar in nature, so, because most of them base it off the International Fire Code. So some of the general rules are, you don't have to have a permit, as long as you just have to follow the rules. The fire has to be attended at all times by an adult. You have to have something there to extinguish it with, a garden hose nearby, a bucket of water, fire extinguisher, something like that. Has to have a screen on the fire. The fire can be no bigger than 2 feet, or 2 feet high and 3 feet wide. The fire pit, whatever you want to call it, has to be constructed out of something non-combustible, metal, stone, or concrete. One problem we've seen is people will just dig a hole in the ground and they'll think and we don't allow that. So they have to have something constructed. We prefer commercially made, but people have done some very artistic things with concrete block or whatever, made really nice looking fire pits. It has to be 15 feet clearance from combustibles, fences, garages, the neighbor's house, everything like that. They have to be using clean, dry wood. That's very important. The times are 11 a.m. in the morning till 1 a.m. Wind speed has to be under 15 miles an hour. And then, even if they're following all those rules, there's a line in there about offensive fire. So if somebody calls in and says, I find this fire is offensive, the smoke is bothering me, whatever, any of those words are used, it's a health hazard to me. Our policy is when we go there, if we can find a fire, we haven't put the fire out. I'll show you how many times we've done that in the past. So our calls related to open burning, and that includes leaf fires, brush, anything that's out in the open. Those are the 3 years there that I have compared, and there really hasn't been an uptick since we started doing recreational fires. Those are our fiscal year. So fiscal year 2014, we had 119 unauthorized burning calls. So we went out and the fire was illegal. Mostly those are due to leaf burning. Wrong day of the week, wind speed's too high, wrong month, stuff like that. 16 of those were related to recreational fires. And of course, we didn't have the ordinance in, so those were all illegal, all had to be put out. And then we had 5 of those calls, we had 5 calls for authorized controlled burns. So people just called in and said, hey, so-and-so's got a fire, whatever, we go out and check it out, and nothing was wrong. Everything was legal, they continued to burn. That was that year. The next year, 94 fires were unauthorized, 37 were related to recreational fires. And out of those, 25 were found to be illegal. So we had those fires put out. 3 of the fires they were doing everything right, following all the rules. However, somebody said they found the fire offensive, so we had them put the fire out. 16 times we got called out and there was no problems with it. It was an authorized burn. This last year, we had 110 calls for unauthorized burning, 30 for illegal recreational fires. So we went out for a fire and they were illegal. Out of those 110, 30 were related to recreational fire. So the other 80 were related to something else, usually leaf burning. We had 32 authorized controlled burns, so we got called out 32 times where they weren't doing anything wrong. Somebody just called, they thought somebody was doing something wrong. We go out, we talk with the person, they're following all the rules, they continue to burn. 5 times we went out, the person was doing everything right. However, somebody said the fire was offensive and we had the fire put out. So what other communities allow recreational burning? Pretty much all of them. It's hard to find some that didn't. Actually, they're Iowa City, Muscatine, Mason City, Ankeny, Keokuk, Clinton, Fort Madison, West Burlington, Davenport, Cedar Rapids, they all allow it. Des Moines doesn't allow it, and Keokuk. There's some other Des Moines suburbs that do not allow recreational fires. Keokuk does allow leaf burning, but they do not allow recreational fires. And Muscatine was the only one I could find that has a permit system in place. So basically, what kind of things could we do differently? Obviously, we could just ban all burning, leaf burning, recreational fires. That would be the very easiest thing for us to enforce. We could restrict the hours. Currently, it's 11 in the morning till 1 AM for recreational fires. I don't know that that would solve, if there's issues, that would solve any of the problems. We could restrict the days, limit the number of days that people are burning, maybe just to the weekend. That seems to be when most people are having fires anyway. Or we could do it by permit only. And I guess the permit only, like Muscatine does an annual permit every January, that's when they have to renew their permits. They pay a fee, the fire department comes out, actually looks at the spot, looks at what they're burning in and verifies that everything is okay, and then issues a permit, and they charge for that. What that would do is allow us to know where the recreational fires are at. There's been a few times where we've been called out and somebody said there's somebody illegal, there's smoke in the area, or I find this fire offensive, and we go out and we're not able to locate a fire. If it was by permit only, we should have a better chance of locating where the fires are at. So,
Do you have any idea how people adhere to that rule? That you have to have a permit? I mean, how many
No.
actually do it?
no.
That would be my question.
Yeah, that would be something where it'd be easy to go out and, right now, normally, we're getting a little stricter, but in the past, usually people got a warning the first time we showed up for any recreational or leaf burning. If they were burning on the wrong day, they just moved to town. A lot of times they just got a warning, we put the fire out. But anymore, we're getting people that are on their second time that we've been there. What I'm saying is, more often than not now, they are getting a citation for anything that's illegal. Now, the health concern, I mean, if they're doing everything legal and we haven't put the fire out, of course, they're not getting a citation for that.
Yeah,
But,
okay.
and that's really, that is all I have about recreational fires. I don't know if you had some more input for me or questions
Yeah, I guess,
Do that.
what are your thoughts on the permit issue?
on the permit. It would take a lot of work. Originally, when I thought of it, I thought from a revenue side, for us making sure that people are doing it right, I'd like from the safety side to go out there ahead of time and make sure they're, I don't know how many people, I have no idea how many people have went out and bought fire pits, made fire pits. 1,000, 500, 200, I mean, if it's 100, 200, that's doable. If it's 2,000 people, we're gonna have to go visit their residences. That's gonna be quite a chore. I don't think it's that many, you know. But yeah, it was doable. It'd be easy to, we do it, we put it on a map, we know what addresses are. We go out there and they don't have a permit, it's easy to say, you're getting a citation. You have to have a permit, so.
Based on your findings of fact, do you have any recommendations?
I knew you were gonna ask me that. It's very hard for me, and that's why I've been so strict on the health thing. If somebody calls in and says it's offensive to my health, I mean, there's no questions asked. Even if they go out and they're like, wind conditions are right, they're using clean, dry wood, there doesn't appear to be any smoke, I don't smell anything, I said, we don't care, we haven't put the fire out. I mean, I don't wanna jeopardize somebody's health so somebody can enjoy fire, and the people have been, everybody we've ever asked to put out a fire has put the fire out. We haven't had to do it ourselves. They're like, okay, I understand, and they'll put the fire out. It hasn't been an issue. So, I haven't given you a recommendation yet. I don't know the answer.
What about 11 AM to 1 AM? How do you feel about that?
Would be a lot nicer for us if we're not going out at midnight to check on recreational fires.
Honestly, to me, that seems
That,
too long a time.
And the number of days might be something to look at.
but most of the complaints aren't later, they're earlier in the evening, when people are
Really?
awake and outside and notice them.
That's a good point.
Well,
That's one thing you can do. You can, instead of eliminating the risk altogether, you can, lower the risk, reduce the hours, reduce the number of days that it's allowed.
Honestly, it seems to me if you're not going to allow fire pits, then I don't see how you can allow any open burning if you're looking at it as a health issue. So,
I would say in the
You know.
winter time, if you drive around town, there are some days in the winter where it's not the outdoor burning, it's the indoor burning, wood stoves,
Wood stoves.
wood boilers. Those create so much smoke that hangs
yeah,
right near the ground. Those are
and you can't really outlaw those. So
no.
Fireplaces, yeah. what's your counsel here, folks? You want to move something, or?
No, I would entertain looking at limiting putting some stricter limits on hours and days.
Yeah, I would go along with that.
I think it made a huge difference when we reduced the ability to burn leaves.
Yeah, I
From
agree with
7
you
days a
there.
week to 2 days a week.
I agree with you there.
And it, even on those 2 days a week, it's much less than what it was before, so.
Yeah.
I think there's that option, and then if I wouldn't have a problem if the fire department kept that attitude of, if someone calls in and says it's harmful, then it's put out.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's bothering me, then it's put out.
Right.
Okay.
So what is, you have a suggestion you want us to work on, or Friday, Saturday, or?
Yeah,
know-
I think we should put something like that out there and then, put it in ordinance form and see
See how it flows?
what people do,
Yeah,
but it may have to be tweaked. I don't know where to start, I don't have enough feedback from people, but
yeah.
you got a recommendation, Jim?
Want to do restricting days? So you're thinking Friday, Saturday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday? Where would you like to start?
Well, I would think you want to do the whole weekend, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.
Yeah, that's what I was.
Because people are, Sunday's a recreational day for a lot of
Right.
families. So you'd for sure want to include Sundays. But I think 11 to 1 is too long a time.
I do too.
Yeah.
But I think if we're restricting the days, to restrict the hours as well, I don't know. If that would bode well with everyone else who enjoys burning.
Well, like I say, we start somewhere and see
Yeah.
what people say,
Right.
you know?
Limit it to Thursday, Friday, Saturday? Or I'm sorry, Friday, Saturday, Sunday? And did you want a time alteration included in that too?
I would prefer that, but
Yeah.
I don't know how everybody else does.
11 PM?
That's, would be my
Yeah,
feeling
that'd be
too.
fine.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
So we can talk about that at our next work session and then see how we go from there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Okay.
it wouldn't be on this next week,
No.
but we'd have
Right.
an action for setting a public hearing for the ordinance. Would be
Okay.
an action item on the
Right.
following.
Okay?
Just so I understand again then, Chief, if a citizen does complain about smoke bothering them health-wise and all, the fire department does go out and see to it that the fire is extinguished.
If we can find one, yep,
Yeah, when you can, I understand.
yeah.
Okay.
There are times that when we've been out, we've got called and they could not locate a fire.
Yeah,
So, I mean, we generally know some of the places to check, they'll go there first and check.
Yeah.
If those don't pan out, then they'll go look in other areas, but.
yeah.
Okay,
Thank you.
good, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So we'll go from there. Okay, thank you, folks. Next discussion item is Otter Island leases. And who are we? Is Eric doing this, Jim, or are you?
Actually, I asked him earlier if he was doing this, and this isn't something that, really, we have a whole lot of responsibility. We have the lease, I gave you a copy of the lease that we do. In terms of, enforcement out there, that is outside of city limits, so it's not processed as, anything that we do out there is not as a nuisance. It has to be dealt with through the lease provisions. Within the lease, I think it's section 5, does talk about maintaining the cabin and the leased area in a safe, sanitary, and orderly condition. If you want to have a decision from a council perspective that, based off of that you're not gonna allow someone to renew a lease who doesn't have a satisfactory facility on there, that's certainly your prerogative, but the ongoing perspective, I guess, has been that what's done is whatever they put up has been deemed acceptable in the past. If there's a change of philosophy, that certainly can be done, but it needs to come from this level that you're providing notice that essentially that you're gonna ask that a structure, any structure that's out there is gonna be acceptable to you. It is your property and you have the right to do that.
And to me, that seems the least that would be acceptable, is if they're not gonna maintain it, then they shouldn't be allowed to renew their lease. Do we have a waiting list of people that wanna lease properties?
I don't know that we have a necessarily, I guess when it's been asked to Katie, she doesn't necessarily have a waiting list.
Okay.
Most of the people that are on, or that have property out there have leased it for a long period of
Right,
years.
right.
Not everybody has a structure out there. There's a lot of the lots that are leased where people just use it to go out and set up a tent, or,
Right.
I assume that you're okay that that's the process that they do, that
I don't have a
you're not
problem.
asking them to put a cabin up.
No, I don't have a problem with that, but
How do we go about identifying cabins or structures?
Well, I think that when the Riverfront Commission brought forward their presentation a month and a half ago or so, they identified, is it 5 properties that they saw as being an issue? You could set that as a standard, that those 5, they certainly are the worst of the 5 out there.
That'd be fine with
You want a
me.
refresher?
No, I remember, yeah.
But I don't know if we might have to look at modifying our language that's within our lease to do that. Our leases are renewable every year. If we want to be a little bit more stringent, we may want to have some language that says on an ongoing, for the future, when we go off of the current lease next June, that this is what we want to hit at. And I think that might be the easiest way to address dealing with a change in council standards towards what you want to see happen, rather than doing it within the midst of an existing lease.
I think that's wise.
It makes sense to me.
Yeah.
And so I think what we may do is, this is where I might have Eric work with Patrick on what would be acceptable language for how do we try to transition properties and set some sort of a standard for what we're looking for a property to meet, to be acceptable.
Okay,
Does that seem fair?
you okay with that?
Yeah.
Sounds
that's-
good.
Yes.
I think that's the minimum we can
Yeah,
do.
okay.
We gotta have some standard to go by.
And I just want something that we can stand on,
That's-
especially if we're gonna be changing the circumstances with some of these folks.
I
'Cause I guess I don't know the individual property owners that are involved with this, or leaseholders, but changing what they are doing is probably, there's some of them that probably aren't, or may not be happy with it. Others, I think there's an understanding that we've had a lot of high water lately, and it has been difficult for any that have been flooded out to be able to actually have time to get in and do something about
Sure.
it, even if they had a desire to.
Yeah,
Well, some of these, this hasn't been a year or two, it's
No,
been
it's been a long time.
10, 15, 20 years of decay there.
Yep.
That's, a couple of them are just about ready to go back to nature.
yeah, I think at a minimum, that's a good idea, John. Are you okay? All right. Okay,
Be sure
Anything else?
and communicate with the advisory board, Riverfront Committee. Let
I
them
think
know.
they're
Oh, yeah.
hearing it,
They're here.
but
okay.
Can I address the council?
Sure, come, sir.
I'd like to make a, after he's done, I'd like to. Doug Smith, 2132 South 15th. I've been on the Riverfront Advisory Committee probably 22 years. Anyway, I'm out on that river all the time. I'm retired now, and I have that opportunity to do that. I see these cabins that are in bad shape up there all the time. I have brought this to the attention several times in the last several years on the committee. Now, I don't know whether the council hasn't been reading our minutes or whatever, but there hasn't been anything done. I don't know why. I know you have a lease, in your lease agreement, whatever, states certain things that have to be done, and whatever. It probably can't be pushed by the way it reads, maybe that needs to be changed. But We also have another problem, up on, from cabin 19, which is lease 19, Brian Cheney, which is not, that's not a problem right there. We have a cabin 20, 20, and 21, 22. The leases are out of order. Don't know why. If you go by the lease numbers, by my sheet, and this is the latest sheet that I have, April 6, 2015. I don't have the present one this year. But for instance, there's been a new cabin added up there, just a small little place. The guy takes good care of it by the name of Redding, Tony Redding. He put a brand new place up there right next to Brian Cheney. Well, what happened to, I guess my question is, what happened to lease 20, 21, 22? They're not listed as far as cabins up there. There's no room to even put 3 cabins in that area. But Redding has got one up there that he put in right next to Cheney, but it's not one of them 3 lease numbers. I don't know what number he is. I don't know whether you people know or not. But I made that a note when we took our tour. And I assume you people probably wasn't aware of that till I brought it up by the notes. That probably needs to be straightened out as far as the leases are concerned.
Eric, do you have that done? Okay.
I don't know who these people are, but I do know who Tony Redding is. He has a brand new one up there, just a little one, right next to Cheney. And then I'm assuming there's one up there right next to, there's a small little bend there. That one's almost in the river. I don't know who that is, but that's one of them's about ready to fall in. And then the one next to it used to be, I think, Rutherford, but he's moved on down to the next lease. That cabin is no longer on the stilts, it's laying flat on the ground. It's a Whiteman, which you probably had some pictures taken out there. You seen them? Okay, right. So that's another thing, and then the one that's the worst shape up there, in my opinion, is the one up on lease 30. That's Justin Redding. I know the kid very well, and it is in very bad shape. It's been that way now started falling in about 5 years ago, and there hadn't been a thing done with it. It just keeps piling up with trees. They keep gathering up there, of course, and nothing's been done to that at all. And it's about ready to go too. That's another one that's in bad shape. So I just thought I'd point them things out to you. As a committee, I think we'd like to see some things done up there, which that's part of our job, jurisdiction, making recommendations. And we go out and we tour the islands every year, try to, if the weather's conducive and it's not high water. But I just don't think there's been anything getting done.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Joanne Bauer, 2523 Sunnyside Avenue. I'm on the Riverfront Advisory Committee. I made the presentation the last time. I think some of you are not interested in Otter Island at all, but I hope you are. When Mr. Furneaux said that, you don't have any jurisdiction over that I question that, because if you owned acreage in North Dakota, Nebraska, I believe you would still have jurisdiction over it. So I question that comment. And it is not allowed to have tents up there. That is not allowed. In the lease, it is a building. If you lease the property, you are supposed to build on the property, and you don't build a tent, okay? So I just want to clear up some of these things that are maybe mistaken ideas. Also, the rent for the lots up there is very cheap. I think it's $200 a year. We would like to see that doubled to at least $400 a year, or $500. And we would like to see those funds come back to the Riverfront Advisory Committee so that we can keep improving the riverfront as we're trying to do. So I'd like you to take that into consideration. And I would like to see some action on this. I know you have a lot of homes in Burlington, Iowa, they're falling down. And I see them every day as I drive by. So your responsibility of a city, keeping the city looking nice, and all property that the city owns looking nice, I think should be taken very seriously. Thank you.
Thank you, John. This one says $250 a year and $600 for Otis County. Okay, all right. Moving on. Chief, White Horse Lounge.
Well, good evening. We put this information together upon a request we had last week from the council, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put some information in front of you in a comparative form and how this shapes up against some other taverns of equal location, equal size. Then we can discuss what we want to do. So at any time, please interrupt me with questions that you have. I've tried to drill it down a little bit, but not to the point that it takes all night either, okay? It's a little bit hard to see, but when I start talking about the neighborhood taverns, I just wanted to put it up there on a map. I mean, most of us know where these taverns are in a comparative nature to in a neighborhood. Okay, because that's what we're talking about with the White Horse Lounge. It is right in the middle of a neighborhood. It's not like it's out on Roosevelt or down on Jefferson, but it's in the middle of a neighborhood. So let's just talk in general terms first about the number of calls for service. And you can kind of see over there, the White Horse, the Beat, Howlers, Joe's Inn, Docks, the Irish Pub, and the Buffalo. And kind of what I really want you to notice about this is we've had conversations, for example, in 2014 with the Irish Pub. We were getting a lot of calls up there, some fights and disorderly. And we had a talk with the owner saying, hey, this is a neighborhood bar, I think it can be run better, what are we gonna do about it? As we look at the trends and how you see that really starting to drop off. But yet, the White Horse keeps increasing other than this year in comparative terms, because I think they've had a lot less of a crowd this year. I'm sure Mr. Smith did fill in the details on just the number of people that they've had. So, I mean, that's what I wanted to point out, that as we have conversations with some of the tavern owners, it seems to work and it goes down, and I'm not so sure that that's the case with the White Horse. So we drilled that down just a little bit, and we're going to talk now these call types: fight, disorderly, noise, suspicious. And what we did, just to be able to even graph this, or chart this to where it made any sense, we took the White Horse, and then we took all the other taverns combined and put them together. And I want you to notice the difference. That's how much time we are spending at the White Horse Lounge compared to all the other taverns put together. So Foot Patrol Tavern Check. I mean, the more problems we have, to a degree, not always, is the more Foot Patrol will have to do there. The exception to this, I think you'll see, is the paddle wheel. The paddle wheel is just very receptive of law enforcement. They always have been. We have a great relationship with them, so I think guys stop in there on occasion to stop in there. It's a friendly environment, and they spend some time in there. It's not really based on complaints. But let's look at the rest of it. And what I found so staggering about this was the Fun City. Look at Fun City in 13, 14, and then look at what happens. Well, what happened there is we had a conversation again with the management, with Rob Higgins specifically, and said, hey, is there anything we can do? Is there some changes we can make? And just total cooperation. I mean, to the point that we really don't even respond there anymore. I mean, it's just cleaned up the whole operation, if you will, for lack of a better word, and it's just really worked out well for us. So, again, it's just in comparison to, I do think management can really control what goes on at their establishment. I truly believe that. And so again, this is to put in comparison with the neighborhood taverns, we combined them all. And here's the amount of time we spend at the White Horse versus every other tavern that we have. And again, in 14, it looks like that was again, if you think back to the Irish pub. I mean, we were having some issues up there. But again, over time, working with the owners, you look at 15 and look at 16, at the difference that's making. And these are really, really serious calls. Shots fired, gun calls. And you know, we talked about this about 6 months ago after we met with Mr. Schott, and we talked about goals and what are the department's going to do. Well, one of our goals is obviously to reduce the amount of gun calls and shots fired calls. And you can see that we're going in the wrong direction at the White Horse Lounge. And I think it is to the point that it's a public safety risk for not only the policemen that have to deal with this, but all the neighbors that live in that neighborhood. And here's some of the more serious calls for service. And we didn't go through there and pick and choose. We just tried to identify some of the more serious calls at the White Horse Lounge. And there, you can read them yourself. I don't have to read to you, but I mean, an 18-year-old gal was taken to the ICU and it was served at the White Horse. And shots fired calls, underage drinking, shots fired. You know, and granted, some of these are anonymous calls, and we always take that into consideration when we respond. But then November 6th, I mean, that was a really, really bad situation there, a really bad situation. So, like I said, I tried to do the best I could to compare it to other neighborhood taverns. And the question is where do we go from here? You know, and that's still a question that we need to be open-minded about. I've talked to Patrick, who's in contact with the ABD, to see if it's a revocation situation or if we wait and deny the permit. I mean, those are all decisions eventually you're going to have to make. There isn't anything that you're going to have to vote on next week just because there's no way we could put a resolution together that fast to see exactly legally where this is going to go. Like I said, I don't know what advice we're going to get back from the legal staff as far as a revocation but again, I just want to reiterate that we've talked to Mr. Smith. As a matter of fact, it goes clear back to when there was a tavern on Valley Street, if you remember, called the Beer Tent. And I personally talked to him about an incident down there, a domestic situation where they locked the doors and wouldn't even let the officers in. I know we're not talking about the Beer Tent, but we're talking about the same owner. Major Kramer talked to him for sure in 2013. Every shift commander I have has been up there. It's not like he doesn't know. I mean, it's not like he doesn't know. He definitely knows. So the permit for a renewal is July. So like I said, I don't want to mislead you from the legal standpoint. I got to find that out for myself. I got some calls in, and Patrick hasn't got back to me. He's a busy man, but he will. I know he will. And then we can address maybe where it goes from here. I just know there was some discussion. It's a serious situation, but I wanted to be as fair as I could too. I mean, it's not the only tavern in town where we have trouble. And I think the numbers are staggering enough when you look at them. A fair question to me would be is, why'd this take so long? Well, the reason it takes so long is because I know that this is somebody's livelihood. But at the same time, we got to think about the greater good.
Right.
And so that's where I'm at with it.
Yeah.
And I feel like you've been given those opportunities.
Okay.
Questions, comments, concerns?
Well, until we know what we legally can or can't do.
I would hope that you would expedite that, finding that out, Chief. This is serious when there's 15, 16, 18-year-olds being served. I would say if that's ever the case and it's ever found out, that the owner ought to be arrested and put in jail.
Well, there is.
And
There is a
I
criminal
just,
charge.
that just cannot be tolerated at all, as far as I'm concerned. And
Are these licensed every year? Is it an annual renewal?
Yes.
Yes, it is.
Annual, okay.
he's got control over that. He's got control over that aspect. Knotheads bringing guns in and shooting each other up, he probably doesn't have control over, but serving 15, 16, and 18-year-olds, he absolutely does. And a person that does that, that has a liquor license, ought to be put in jail.
Well, again, and keep in mind, you know, some of these complaints are anonymous, and we always have to take that in consideration too. Because as many tavern checks as we're doing in there, there's no way at that time, unless they can get to the bathroom or something, that a 16-year-old is gonna be sitting in there with a beer in front of them.
Yeah.
You know, so keep that in mind. We spend a ton of time in that tavern, so, you know, like I said, I think it needs to be fair and balanced, so, and that's what we're trying to do.
Okay. All right,
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
Thanks, Chief.
Thank
Yep.
you.
thank you, Chief.
Thanks, Eric.
The next discussion item was looking again at our review estates with the Sizer development. And a concern was raised about water runoffs. Is that accurate?
Yes, I had a call from a citizen, and the point that the citizens had was that they believed that at the end of the planning commission meeting, that that they were going to propose that a second cul-de-sac be put in on that northbound lane. And they felt that what was being proposed at the council meeting was not that same proposal. And so, and they didn't receive any communication to the contrary prior to the council meeting. And I felt that maybe they needed to have another opportunity to address council on the matter. I'm thrilled to death that development's happening, but I want it to be right for the developer and those in the neighborhood. So we've had some communication with the city attorney, and I'm gonna let staff explain what he said.
Eric, was there a difference potentially with water runoff, cul-de-sac, as opposed to the hammerhead that we had said there?
Not necessarily. It would have had a larger bulb at the end of the road versus a road connecting all the way to the north. Potentially could have been the same number of lots, just different configuration. Stormwater issues there have been raised, are presently there. Any new development isn't necessarily gonna fix existing problems, it just can't make them worse. Generally, they improve them, but we've had this come up before where there's existing problems in the neighborhood and a new development comes in. It's not gonna make it worse, but it's not necessarily there to solve all the existing problems. It's kind of a separate issue that needs to be addressed.
In regards to what was brought to the council, Eric's information brought forward the original request, some of the recommendations from the fire department, as well as what was finally approved from the planning and zoning. And the council, as you went through that process, heard the different pieces of that, and you made a recommendation to go different from what planning and zoning had in their recommendation, which was part of the package, part of the council packet
Right.
last time, which you are allowed to do. You went with primarily, not quite the original proposal, you added some of the information from the fire department as well. I'm not sure if there are any other alterations, because I wasn't involved in that, but in terms of notifications of owners, where are the times where you have a requirement to have notification to owners within a certain distance?
We do for any ordinance change for zoning requirements. For all our planning commission items, we provide notice to them. I don't believe we do for council, final plats, platting processes.
Did you
But
do
we
the ones that are legally required
Yeah,
within
for the planning commission, and this went through the rezoning earlier in the year as well, and there's
Right.
notification
Right.
through the planning commission and council process there. And it's the same development proposal that was presented at the rezoning as well.
But notwithstanding, I mean, in terms of how the process worked, it worked the way in an appropriate manner. That notwithstanding, that still leaves the question of, what are your thoughts on what to do with the issue of of water. You had some comments from the attorney in terms of, basically, I guess essentially his recommendation would be that that wouldn't be the basis for how you would deal with this on, this isn't the appropriate manner to,
Yeah.
or recommended manner for dealing with that. Now, Eric, during the process of doing the actual subdivision, are there any safeguards in place to try to work with making sure that there aren't additional, or isn't additional water runoff onto the
They
adjacent?
submit stormwater plans and detention plans. He has a lot shown here for stormwater detention. Those calculations are submitted to the Public Works Department for review. Again, it's to not increase what is already occurring there. It's not gonna solve what problems may already existing in the neighborhood. And that's the same with any new development subdivision. They have to make sure the development doesn't increase any issues or increase stormwater. That's why there's detention basins and piping calculations, but it's not gonna solve some of the issues that may already be there.
Now, on the backside though, if a development occurs, you know, what happens if there is an issue?
Then it'd be a legal issue. If they're not meeting the requirements that they set forth through our Public Works Department, I guess that's reviewed, the stormwater calculations, then it'd be a city issue to deal with.
And it's not, there isn't a magic with that.
Yeah.
That solves the issue. I mean, from a stormwater calculation basis, when they're having to do the detention basins, that's to only addressing the first inch and a half?
Yeah, and, it's a certain rainfall event in a certain hour.
sure
It
the
has to,
amount. 100-year rain events. So they have to make a determination that they're addressing a 100-year rain event.
and all the detention basins and piping are based off of that, but again, it's not gonna,
That still doesn't alleviate the concern that you have between adjacent property owners
Yeah.
as the development happens, because there's still things that can go through. I don't know that I have a great answer. You have background from the attorney in terms of why he would recommend that this is a difficult issue to bring into this part of a process, but
I guess I don't really see the point of going back over it again. I mean, we have in place the requirements to take care of the runoff issues, and
I guess
I really don't see-
my concern is the same as the property owner that brought this forward, because of past experience that he's had in a very similar situation where development occurred in his backyard, and it increased the flow of water onto his property, and there was ultimately nothing he can do because of the legal cost involved to try to get the offending property to correct the issue. And if there's any way that we can make some assurances to him that that's not going to happen, then I would feel better. I don't know that there is, but.
well, just other than what Eric has already stated.
we're not, our codes don't handle all issues. They have some certain set requirements for what they are designed to do, and that doesn't necessarily hit everything that could come up. And that's just so long and short of it. But, I mean, to some extent, you're gonna have, with what has to happen for stormwater detention and in the development, you're gonna have certain things that are gonna be better for runoff conditions than what they already were. But with that development occurring, you don't know what other things happen along with it that
Right.
may be trade-offs.
True.
So
It's true.
it's all we can do is hold them to what our codes
So what
show.
our requirements are, yeah.
But that doesn't mean that you don't end up with a potential issue between two property owners. And what you want to do with it, I guess, you certainly have the right to alter what you've done. Your attorney is just recommending that that's probably not the best course of action at this point. But
I guess I don't see the point of
Could I
making a
make
change.
comment, an observation that as the adjoining property owner? And I've mentioned this to Scott before. My name is Mary Ann Brown, and 4 Old Colony Road, which is immediately north of this lot, the development. The development is wonderful. We think it'll be a great addition to the neighborhood. But the lot that number 4 is on is immediately north of the big lot number 17 on the Zeiser project. And it's an immediate 3-foot drop. Zeiser property, and it's 3-foot drop down to our yard. We've had to put a drainage system in there to pump the water out already, and that's done. Zeiser installed it, and we pump it out to a pit and pump it out of the yard then. One of the things that I think you could still do and not change what you've done, we would have been here if we'd known it was going to be on the agenda last week, and we're sorry that we weren't. We made these comments to the Planning Commission when we met with them. But one of the concerns is that we have a retaining wall, a stone retaining wall with a raised flower bed as a buttress to the retaining wall for that 3-foot drop-off. City setbacks are 7 foot. Somebody can build a house, a 4,000 square foot house on that big 3/4 of an acre lot and put it 7 foot from that 3-foot retaining wall right now. There's no way on God's green earth that there's not gonna be water runoff from that, because everything flows to the north there. Even if there's drainage taken care of on the south side, it's not gonna take care of that building that's built 7 foot from that 3-foot drop-off immediately. I think that when you do the final plat, you can also consider some things that could include a setback that's different on that lot because of that. If that building could at least be 25 feet or something like that from that 3-foot drop-off, that would help the runoff from going straight north. I mean, little things like that that don't alter what you've already voted on, which I recognize you have. But when you approve that final plat, you can adjust some things, I think, and that's one thing to think about, because there's no way that there will be more water if somebody builds a house or a garage or a building immediately adjacent to our property. Because the drainage is at the south end of the lot, not the north end of the lot for collecting it, which means the natural flow will go north where it's lower. So that's a concern. And that's one thing that you can do to take that into consideration, so.
Thank
So it's
you.
not, even though you've already done something here, it's not finished, I don't think, completely for
Well,
your
no, it's not,
interpretation.
because of the final plat.
That's
yeah.
right.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
What can you do on that, Eric?
You couldn't adjust the setbacks except through an ordinance and code change. You could potentially, I guess with discussion of the property owner, have some sort of easement there, but that would be a change from the preliminary plats. We'd need to have discussion with the developer on that, whether there be some sort of restrictive easement on that lot. And a preliminary plat approval is substantially approving this, provided they meet all our requirements. Any change requested, I would probably recommend having some discussion with the developer on that.
Scott
Can you
wanted to
do
say
that?
something, too.
Go ahead.
Yeah, here's the developer.
Scott Zeiser, 2400 Sunnyside, I guess, as a developer address. I agree with the issues with drainage. We could not develop this and we'll still have the same issues we have as today. We can just leave it as bare ground. We can develop it, make it a very viable development in Burlington, Iowa, which I'd like to see happen. And if we need to make some adjustments on lot 17, we can probably do something like that to alleviate maybe some of the concerns that Marianne has on her property too. So willing to work with Eric if that needs to be, but we're being very proactive here. We're putting retention ponds in, we're putting rainwater gardens in, stuff that normally doesn't happen in a subdivision to take care of the existing issues with water. I don't think they're gonna get worse. They're definitely not gonna get worse. If anything, they'll get better because we are retaining a lot of this water that is right now running freely to the east and to the north. So, that's what I see happening, and we're spending quite a bit of money to have this engineered to make sure it fits into the realm of the city code and everything else, so.
Good.
Okay?
Good.
All right.
Sounds like a good
Thanks, Scott.
discussion then. Good. Okay. So what do you think? Okay, you satisfied? Good to have the discussion.
Yes.
Yeah. Don't think there's anything we need to do right now? No? Okay. All right, thank you, folks. It's good that neighbors talk to each other.
Yeah, by all means.
All right. On our appointment list, we have a Flint Hills Golf Advisory Committee. Arthur Gordon has expressed interest there. Human Rights Commission. An Tan Dang, is that how he says his name? I don't know for sure. Parks Advisory, Lindsay Bumeyer, and Riverfront, Nancy Cavanis is for that. Okay, any problems? Anybody see? All right, we're going back to the top then. Let me get back to the top here. All right. Anybody need a break? All right. Mayor's Award, 10 years award. Okay, here we go. Public hearing, consideration of sale of property at 503 Summer Street, Burlington, Iowa. Eric, you want to talk about that one?
This is abandoned property the city acquired, okay, on Summer Street, south of Maple Street. It's a 1.5-story brick home, 2-bedroom, 1 full bath. We do have, I believe, 3 bids on this, or offers on this property currently. I think mostly around the minimum bid price, but 3 interested parties in it.
Okay.
So we expect to have our auction type sale, and again, has to be brought up to code, meet the minimum requirements. We do have information on our Facebook page. Did post something in the Hawkeye on Sunday, just noting the sale as well, so hopefully we have some more interest in it.
Okay. The last couple that we sold, they're making progress right off the bat, aren't they? If
yeah.
you've been out there to see them, they're looking good. Very well. All right. Questions of that one? All right, consideration of amending various sections of Chapter 157 Electrical Code. I assume these are updates on,
Yeah, this is
International.
going from the 2011 to the 2014 National Electrical Code, with a couple of provisions in it. One, as we discussed previously when we adopted the residential code, that the International Residential Code was intended to be a one-stop code, and that's noted for 1 and 2 family dwelling units. I guess one of the changes under 157.05, wiring methods and materials, taking out number 2, armored cable, as, I guess, one of the city code changes that made it a little more restrictive than what the National Electrical Code allowed. So this takes that out to allow its use wherever they're able to use that. That's a flexible tubing, instead of just the conduit. It can be used a little more easily in some of the existing buildings. And we had the provision in there that you could use it where there's constraints, and this takes that out, so you can use it wherever you, I guess, are able to. Some of the concerns previously were some of the fittings weren't quite up to par, and some of those have changed and been more acceptable and improved. So tried to look at the code from a standpoint of making sure we're not being overly restrictive and also safe at the same time. So just a couple other minor changes under 157.04 within the code, but otherwise primarily just going to the updated code version.
Excellent.
I assume that these will be renumbered appropriately, all of these.
Yeah,
We're
yeah.
going to lead a whole section then. Yeah. I know that's coming up in the zoning code too.
Yeah.
So you like this, Mr. Scott?
Yes, excellent.
Guys?
Yep.
Okay. All right, plumbing code next. Same situation there?
Yeah, here going from the 2012 to the 2015 edition of the Uniform Plumbing Code. Again, 1 and 2 family dwellings spells the residential code. Just some minor wording changes, going from the 2012 edition to the adopted plumbing code. Just clarifying water meters are required for buildings connected to a public water system, which is controlled by Waterworks.
That includes residences and everything, right?
Yep. And they're currently under that. This is just, they're the ones that have those requirements or enforce that. This is just a clarification so that people don't look at our code and think that they're not required.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anything on this one, Mr. Scott? No? Ms. Wilson?
No.
Mr. Fleming? Okay. Thank you, Eric. Okay, now, here we go. Change in zoning codes. chapter 170.
Couple changes here. I guess we had it broken into 3 sections. Non-conforming structures. This was discussion on being able to upgrade or rehab existing non-conforming structures, primarily accessory structures, when they don't meet our setback requirements. So we did a lot of research from other communities and looked at what might be an acceptable alternative to allow rebuild of accessory structures that are closer to than the required 3 feet to the property lines. We have a lot of older structures that don't meet that requirement. A couple communities have some of these requirements in place where they are allowed to rebuild within that 3-foot setback, provided they get a maintenance agreement from the neighboring property owner, and then get a conditional use permit from the zoning board of adjustment for an accessory structure. Reasons for that is currently properties or structures on property lines, legally they're not allowed to go on their neighbor's property to maintain that structure unless there's a easement in place. We do have a lot of neighbor disputes or complaints of neighbors entering other property or building up to the property line. So having a maintenance agreement, easement agreement in place would allow them to maintain their structure, make repairs on the property line, and then the zoning board would just be a review to make sure everything's in place for that. Try not to be too onerous of a process, but make sure we're covering all the bases to allow someone to rebuild on the property line. So that applies to single-family uses. Multifamily would only be allowed if they're in a historic district and following the same requirements for a maintenance easement agreement and then a conditional use permit through the zoning board for accessory structures. So that's kind of a summary of that first change, Amendment 1 to non-conforming structures. This would allow instances where a garage is on the property line, provided they get a maintenance easement agreement from their neighbor, that they could rebuild as is on that property line.
Mr. Scott and I were talking about this before the meeting. I'm glad to see this coming. When I was on the zoning board, this was one of the most difficult things that we had to deal
That
with.
seems to be one of the more recurring themes is older garages trying to rebuild as is and meet the setbacks, so.
Eric, on the wording on this, if you have a house burned down on a lot where that's not large enough for current standards, can that house be built back?
In our current code, you can rebuild an existing single-family house
Even
on
if
any existing platted lot.
if it's even on a non-conforming
Has-
lot that's not large enough?
On a non-conforming lot that's not large enough, but it has to meet all setbacks.
Okay,
So-
so would this change away that setback issue?
This would change it for, I guess, adjacent property. This is intended for, to your neighbor's property, where there's a maintenance easement agreement. And that's a good point. I'll have to look at that. You're talking to an alley or to a street.
Well, I'm just thinking that we've had some houses that have burnt down where that wasn't large, what the footprint wouldn't allow a new house to be built on them. And I was wondering if this change would impact that or not,
I'll have to look at that a little bit more and make sure we
The way it's-
clarify that.
the way it's-
The way it's written.
the way it's written.
The primary impetus or how this brought forward was through accessory
Yes.
structures, so we may not have addressed that as much as maybe we need to and clarify
Yeah,
that
I'm
through.
just looking at the new language that's
Yeah.
in there, and it's talking about your primary
Mhm.
residence as well as the accessory.
Yeah,
Well, that first sentence says a non-conforming structure that is used as a single-family use that is destroyed or deteriorated shall be allowed to be restored to its previous size, including area, height, lot coverage, setback. Does that answer that question?
I think it's. Yes, that's my question, because I don't think that was what the intent was when they were considering this.
yeah.
Oh, I see.
But I wanna know, is that part of the consequence of what you're doing?
Yeah.
And is that what you wanna be doing?
Review that a little bit more.
Okay. The next part then?
This is for zero lot lines, just, instead of having to go through a rezoning or PUD process for single-family or two-family, multifamily R2, R3, or R4 zoning districts, that would be allowed use in those districts to have the zero lot line. Currently, these all allow multifamily or two-family dwellings. Typically, you see the condos where someone owns an individual building but not the lot, and the trend lately has been to subdivide the lot so that each building or half of a building is on its own individual lot. So this puts provisions in place to allow for that in R2, R3, and R4 districts, and then still allows an R1 going through the process, through the PUD process to make sure there's additional review, since R1 is the only district that only allows single-family residential. So for R2, R3, or R4 districts, zero lot line would be allowed, provided they meet the setback, a minimum lot width, and minimum lot area as noted in the table here. And then in R1, they would still go through the PUD process, but it is allowed through that PUD process so that there's additional review in R1 single family.
This is kind of a major change. I assume that zoning board has been okay and they had comment, or,
Yeah, the planning commission,
planning,
Yep.
I'm sorry, planning
yeah,
commission.
they recommended approval of these and had review and comment on them.
My 41's different than yours.
Oops.
My page numbers, that's all right, go ahead.
Comments, council, questions? Okay, Eric, what else is there?
Those are the three changes, the non-conforming
All right,
zero lot line and then zero lot line in R1.
okay. Good. Next, resolution approving final plat for the Gillette Farm subdivision. This is an outside the city limits?
This is actually in the city limits.
Oh, it is?
Yeah,
Really?
the airport is just to the northeast of this property, with Roosevelt off to the west. You can see this red line here. This denotes the city limits, so it is just inside the city limits,
okay.
with the county being outside of that. Again, one of the properties where they're splitting off a portion of the home from the remaining farm. So that's what the subdivision shows. 2.23 acres, including the road right-of-way there, splitting off from the remaining portion of the farm.
Okay. Any questions there, council? All right. Resolution approving maintenance and operation of public infrastructure for Westbrook Estates, Phase 2.
Good evening. I need to start off by saying I need to make a correction to the resolution. In the acceptance, we need to include the sanitary sewer. While though it would be operated ultimately by West Burlington, the
yeah.
infrastructure within city limits will be ours.
Okay.
So barring anything from Berner, Cooper, and Zook, I would recommend acceptance.
Questions? No? Okay, thank
By
you,
the,
Nick.
yeah, by the 28E that we have with West Burlington on these areas that we can't service with our sewer, we maintain responsibility for the, for the sewer infrastructure that's within our city limits. At the change from one community to the other, they take over responsibility. So-
It'll be a short section of
And
sanitary.
that one's immediately
It'll be
adjacent to
100
West
foot of
Burlington, so it's
sanitary sewer,
not a
so.
major piece, which is where I think I got missed, is just how close that is.
Yep.
Okay, thanks. Next, a resolution to enter an agreement with Impact 7G Inc. related to U.S. Environmental Protection Agency grant award for brownfield assessment and related services.
This is the grant. We received $400,000 for brownfield assessments and services. We sent out an RFQ to various firms and advertised on our website. I believe we got back, was it 5
5 or 6, I
or
can't
6, and had a review of those. Decided upon Impact 7G, rated highest among the average scores of the group. This contract lays out their scope of services, including budget based on the $400,000 grant award, $16,000 for project coordination, $330,000 for environmental site assessments, completing phase 1 and 2 environmental site assessments, cleanup and area-wide planning, and as well as community outreach. The city will also have a portion of that, $10,000, required to attend conferences, national and regional brownfield conferences, as well as publication meetings, et cetera. So the total would add up to $400,000. This is designated in the downtown area, hoping to conduct a number of phase 1 and 30 to 40 phase 1s and 12 to 16 phase 2s. Part of it will also help us to leverage future funds for cleanup, hopefully, and as we move forward through this process to continue to receive and seek out funds through the EPA. If you want to add anything, Jim, to this?
No, we had several firms that were all very, very competitive and have some really good experience in doing this. And I think that we probably, out of the, if it was, I think all but 2 of the ones were right up at the same tier of companies who've done a great job in doing these assessments and leveraging it into additional projects that can be worked on over time. So this is the goal of what this assessment process is, not only to identify issues or to identify properties where we can clearly say there are no issues, but to try to also leverage getting some cleanup money in the future. A lot of the communities where EPA does award funds into, you just have yourself in line over the subsequent decade to be able to just be better positioned to try to get some of those cleanup funds.
Am I understanding this correctly? This is for the downtown area?
Primarily. We'll have a little bit of latitude on that, but the primary focus was written to be that, and we have to be pretty close to that.
All right. Council, you okay?
Yep.
All right, moving to the consent agenda. Resolution authorizing internal loan for cleanup and paving of the former Dresser Rand site, 1106.
Okay.
Washington.
The first 3 resolutions are all pretty similar in type. Basically, what we need to do, when we amended our 2015 TIF urban renewal,
When we did the urban renewal plan amendment last year, we identified these 3 as well as, I think, 3 other projects, including like the Apollo building for potential work to be done.
Yeah, so that was the first step, is amending that plan and putting these projects, that as these projects proceed, we were going to use TIF funds to fund them. So this is the next step in the process. We're creating these internal loans to pay for these projects that will be paid back with TIF revenue that we receive in the future. So this is a step. They've all been approved by Bob Jostin, our attorney that looks at all the TIF. So these are 3 projects that we are going to be working on this fiscal year that we will get reimbursed with TIF funds.
The majority of this amount, with the TIF funds that are coming in through the end of next fiscal year, fiscal 18, that we'll be starting the budget process for here pretty soon, we'll be collecting enough TIF revenue to cover maybe not all of this amount, but pretty close to the total of this amount. And that's kind of what we were setting up for, was to try to just put ourselves in line to have TIF debt certified and ready to be repaid to allow them to be, well, this is a step that you have to do to allow you to use TIF funds on the project, so.
Right. And the TIF certification report is due to the county December 1st, so that's why they're all coming through now. They have to be approved by you, and then I'll put them on the report to be certified as debt with the county, so then we can collect the revenue on them.
With the amounts that you see in here, the Dresser Rand is at $750,000. The contract that we had for the cleanup on that site was $590,000 originally. We probably have, we haven't seen final costs yet, but we're anticipating with the one change order we've had, some quantity adjustments, probably into the 630,000 range. We had some additional costs already. I don't think we're gonna get to 750,000 total cost between, what we paid to Impact 7G as well as this cleanup. What will end up happening next year, if it's, for example, $700,000 our actual costs, we'll have to go through a process of decertifying the other $50,000 of internal loan and just release it back. The other amounts, 500,000 for Division Street, that includes not just the widening of Division Street, but the roundabout that's part of that same RISE project with Silgan. And I think that was fairly close to what we were looking at as an anticipated our share. When we get to next year, we will probably be, I don't know if we'll be to final cost yet by next year to know what our true up is. So that true up may occur the following year. The subsequent one on Agency Street for 500,000, I think our match on that, well, that might be about what our match was on that first half. But we will most likely this next year, be coming back with an additional piece, a second phase of an internal loan and to cover our costs on it.
And you haven't mentioned where this money comes from.
TIF.
Loaning it from where to where? Where are we borrowing money from?
Oh, the projects are happening at our capital projects fund, yeah.
I know it says that there, but
Sure.
people out there didn't hear that.
Sure, yeah, these are all capital projects that are happening in the capital projects
Yeah.
fund, and then they'll be paid back with the TIF revenues.
Do we know when Agency Street is going to happen?
Do we know when Agency Street might happen?
We hired a city engineer today, he started, so the projects are gonna start moving forward,
The
as
agency,
now we're fully staffed again.
and the Agency Street one was a difficult one. It was supposed to happen this last year,
Yeah.
and surprise, surprise, it didn't. Design work we're hearing 80% done. One of the major pieces that I think still isn't completed is the crossing, the railroad crossing area. So that still needs to be worked out, and the transition from one engineer doing the design work to a new one creates some complications. Our goal, if we can get it done, and I don't know until we get people up to speed and see what's going on, it may be that, we were supposed to do the Agency Street west of Roosevelt Avenue this summer, and then Agency Street east the next summer. Well, we're gonna have to see if that's something where we roll both of them ultimately into one contract and do all at once, or still have them staggered. We're not really sure yet where we're at, and I think that until we have.
But delays doesn't jeopardize the RISE
No.
grant in any way?
No, not at all.
Okay,
We're fine with it.
all right. You okay?
Yes.
You okay? Yeah. Thank you, Stephanie.
Okay.
All right, that takes care of those three.
Yes.
All right, moving on. Resolution obligating funds from the Greater Burlington Partnership TIF rebate subfund to the city's urban renewal tax revenue fund for appropriation to the repayment of the annual appropriation tax increase rebate payments due to be paid in the succeeding fiscal year.
That's very wordy.
Yeah, sure is.
Straight from the attorneys. The next one, the one you just read was the Greater Burlington Partnership, and then the next resolution is the Weingard TIF. So these are the tax rebates that were set up several years ago. Once a year, you have to annually appropriate what we're gonna receive in taxes and what we're gonna pay back to them. So this is another thing that gets certified December 1st to the county. The county auditor sends me the estimates of the tax increment that they're gonna pay to us, and then, for example, the Weingard one, it's 75%. It's calculated up to that max of what's in this resolution. Grow Greater Burlington, it's 100%. We track, of course, they all have max dollar amounts over the life of the TIF rebate, so that's tracked every year to make sure we're not getting close to the max. These just started, 2-3 years ago, so. But as we get closer, they might not last 10 years. If there's more taxes coming in, they'll only last to or they will only be up to the amount that was originally certified.
The Grow Greater Burlington was to assist with the sale of the spec building. The council authorized up to $500,000 worth of rebate on over 10 years. Based on where we're at the first 3 years, I think we were 18 and then 22 and now 40,
Yeah.
something like that. And it'll stagger up to about that 50,000 ultimately by the 5th year. And they won't collect the full 500,000 over 10 years. The other property with Weingard, that was the redevelopment of the Fairway site that the council approved back in 2011 or early 12. We did a 10-year, or was it 12 on that one? Might have been 10.
I don't think it was 10.
5 at 75% and 5 at 50%.
Yeah.
And this is, I think, the 3rd year as well on that. And you'll see here the amount that they're collecting puts them a little bit closer to on track to potentially receive the full, the up to, was it 1.2 million or so?
Yes.
That was in our original resolution.
There is a legal reason why we have to do this every year, isn't that
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, when it's originally set up as a tax rebate, you have to annually appropriate the
You-
amount you're gonna pay to
You don't
them.
have to. The difference that it makes, if you don't do an annual appropriation, you have to account the full 10-year agreement as current debt.
That's what I'm getting to, yeah.
So this is a way to keep from having those full agreement amounts counting against our outstanding debt.
Yeah.
But what it leaves also is that ultimately the recipient is subject to, their ability to receive this is subject to your willingness to continue to do the annual appropriation.
Right.
Which is where we're at now.
And I would have a hard time going back on my word on that.
Yeah.
All right.
That would not be good.
No, I won't say,
Good to know,
I won't say that.
good to know.
I'll hush about some other legislative group that would, no. Okay, we're good.
Good.
You want to talk about the urban renewal report?
Sure.
Too, Stephanie?
This is a state report that has a December 1st deadline also. So the first 5 resolutions were all about the TIF revenue we're going to collect in the future. This report is looking back into fiscal year 16. And it basically is a report where we've identified all our TIF projects. We identify the revenue that's came in through all our different TIF districts that are set up by the county. And then we report all the revenue, and then we report all the expenditures, which we have 2 types of expenditures. There's the TIF rebates. So there's a line where you'll see what we paid the Weingard and the Grow Greater Burlington for the fiscal year 16. And then the non-rebate expenditures, those are all debt repayments. Mostly they're bond payments that we have made from projects we certified to be paid back with TIF debt. And then the small internal loans that we have outstanding right now.
Okay.
So this will be approved by you next week, and then I'll file it to the state. The Department of Management gets this report. I'll do that after it's approved.
This is a requirement that came up just a couple, 3 years ago, wasn't it?
2012 or 2013?
2012, yeah.
Yeah.
And the report format is one that was set on a statewide basis and didn't necessarily make it easy to look at or decipher. And part of the problem of a legislative group not necessarily knowing exactly what they wanted, nor with the variance that there is between communities, it's just not that easy a report to go through and look at.
Thank you for hanging in there with it.
Yeah.
Questions? Yes. Excuse me.
I'm just amazed at how much work goes into this
Yeah.
and the size of the staff that gets it done. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
Again, we can say, well, what a great staff we have, can't we say that? Yeah. What do you want to talk about next?
My annual financial report.
Annual financial report, okay.
So another state report that's due December 1st. They stuck to that same deadline, so that's why they all come at once. Eric is putting up the report that this will be published in the Hawkeye next week, after you guys approve it next Monday. Basically, this is a look-back report. This is the financial report for fiscal year 16. So this is the recap of everything rolled up into the summary. It looks very similar to how our budget reports look, and that's basically what it's trying to do, is compare the revenues and the expenditures, and then what our budget numbers were. The detail is in the, you guys have all the detail too, but if you want to drill down to see it by fund and different activities, it's all there. But in the paper will just be this one page. So again, you've been looking at the treasury reports all year. You've been hearing us talk about the audit, so these are basically the final numbers. We did actually which went over budget in one category. It'll be written up in our audit report too, but our expenditures in culture and rec went over what we had budgeted by approximately $78,000. And what we forgot to take into account was the extra additional hotel motel tax revenues we are getting in turn causes us to spend more money. We have to turn it back over to the chamber, and then other projects. So we didn't up that enough as what we needed to be, as we estimated what the revenues were coming in to be, so.
Yeah, our
That doesn't make me happy,
The
but-
good news is that
That's
our
not-
revenues
Yeah.
were a good 100,000 higher than we anticipated.
That's not necessarily bad.
I know.
Yeah.
For an accountant it is when you go over budget.
I know, yeah, I got it, Stan.
But does anybody have any questions on this report?
I don't.
I don't.
Okay.
Okay. Lane?
Good.
Yep. Thank you, Steph. Resolution authorizing partial releases of real estate mortgage. What in the world is that?
This has to do with the Manor site, and as the developer goes through the process of selling individual lots, we've had the Sonic site. What else has been announced?
I think the furniture
The furniture one,
Site,
we did
transfer.
a couple of
motion.
months ago, and the
Yeah.
one that's currently up is for selling a lot to
Pizza Ranch.
Pizza Ranch.
Yeah.
So when we go through that process, since the original purchase that was done was set up with the $2.4 million, $1.2 million upfront, and then the remaining $1.2 million 2 years later, or once 50% of the property had been developed, there's essentially a lien for that $1.2 million against, that's still owed to us until that 2-year period is over and they make that second payment. That being the case, each time they come to sell a piece of property, they need us to sign off on the mortgage. This resolution is authorizing the mortgages to be signed off on. It mentions, this didn't come, I don't know why it didn't come up the first two. But I asked the question of the attorney if the mayor could sign off on the third one, and said we need to do a release by the council. I'm like, I don't think you had us do that, the other two.
No.
So this is going back and cleaning that up and taking care of the current one, and it also has language in there that provides flexibility for the mayor to sign off on future releases, subject to us verifying that everything's in compliance.
All right, that's a good idea. Yeah. Okay, guys?
Yep.
All right, resolution approving the correction to the purchase of an easement from an unaddressed lot on South 10th Street for the construction of the storm sewer associated with the 2016 Cascade Watershed Sewer Separation Project, Phase 2.
This resolution approves a correction to the easement that we attained back in September. In between us having everybody sign off on things and us recording it, the property owner, Mr. Schwanker, transferred the property from his name to his land holdings via quitclaim deed. So we just missed it by like a week. In order to do it properly, we need to correct the easement. There will be no further compensation. Talked to Mr. Schwanker about it. It won't be an issue. So this
Okay.
is just the process that we need to get the proper easement.
All right. You want to talk about the next one also?
This is kind of
Wait,
a similar
excuse me,
deal.
hold on a second.
Oh, sorry.
Resolution approving the correction to the purchase agreement for the right-of-way for the roundabout.
This is unfortunately of a similar nature. We approved the purchase agreement for the parcel for the roundabout with DR Steam. In the meantime, they did a big transfer of properties over to Siemens, so we have to now approve the purchase agreement underneath that new name. So again, the budget implications are the exact same as they were in the previous, just a change in name.
Okay. You all right? Pretty straightforward? That's why it's on the consent agenda? Okay. All right. Resolution approving the purchase of a new fuel management system. Wow, for the Public Works Building.
I have Ron Phillips here who can maybe ask some of the technical questions. To give kind of a background, the fuel management system that has been installed in 2001 is still in operation. It uses DOS to compute the fuel reports, so if that tells you anything. We, in discussion with Mr. Furneaux and Mrs. Stuker about the financing on how to pay for this, we will be increasing the fuel cost to everybody that uses it by a nickel to pay for this unbudgeted cost.
We already collect that nickel.
Oh.
We had that, I think you began that last fiscal year. So the source of revenue is already there.
That's how we're paying for it.
Okay.
And it was designed to cover some of these additional costs that we don't have an identified stream. It's, really just to cover our overhead and make sure that you can handle all these extra administrative things.
Sounds good. If you have any questions about the system, Ron is here too. And actually, maybe I could introduce him. He's been an employee for 6 months. Some of you may know him because he ran his own shop, but Ron Phillips is our vehicle maintenance manager, so.
Good. Thank you, Ron. Question? Updating is always a good thing, isn't it? Resolution authorizing the filing of an application for water quality demonstration project for green alleys in the 300 and 500 blocks of Jefferson Street. Application for project. Who's talking about this?
This is an application to the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship for water quality demonstration projects. We're working with the TAMA project. They had already set aside $200,000 in green alley improvements adjacent to their property. And we can qualify up to $100,000 through this grant program, utilizing the funds they're already putting in place as a match for the project. They're doing improvements in the 300 block of Jefferson Street in the alley adjacent to their building. We were looking at adjacent to the 500 block of Jefferson Street, adjacent to the parking ramp there, between 5th and 6th Streets. It is a competitive grant. They do typically look towards more county-type projects, but felt with the funds that they're utilizing and being able to leverage outside funds for additional funds, it was worth the attempt to put forward an application and hopefully receive some funds to make improvements there.
Good. Questions?
No, but I saw someone had done a green driveway. And I couldn't visualize it until I saw it. I saw one today. And it was pretty neat. I can't remember where it was at. It's here in town, but it's what it looks like they've taken fancy blocks and turned them on their side, like cinder blocks or concrete blocks. And then there's fill in between them, and it's a loose fill. And you drive onto this driveway on these bricks or blocks.
K Wise on North Main has something similar to that.
Who's that?
K Weiss in the building.
That's it, that's where I saw it. Yeah, K Wise's.
Yeah.
I don't know how well that functions. We did had a demonstration done up at Coralville on some of the projects they do. They do a significant amount of this. Had one of their model projects was done at the mayor's house. Imagine that. The drive there has, in the last year and a half, has had no water runoff. the pavers are able to take all of it through. They have an overflow chamber that has not gotten any water into it.
That's amazing.
So some of the things can work fairly well, they're just pretty expensive. Coralville is, with their residential subdivisions, has done a lot of the rain garden along the street, that's designed to capture all the rainwater that comes off and filter it on into and what they're seeing is they have some sand seams that they're able to hit, and it goes directly down, and they're really able to minimize water runoff with it. But they also have staff that are paid to do just that. They've are at a level that we can't get to yet. But with this project, we'd identified $100,000 out of the state funds that we received to do a demonstration project in the downtown area for permeable paving that we were looking at using in the alleys. With the grant that Charlie's been working on, and he's gotten some cost estimates back.
They keep going up because
Yes.
it's wider than what was estimated.
So the $100,000 that we're looking at may just be a project that does the other half of the alley that on Third that is adjacent to the Tama building. Just complement off of the $200,000 that they have received. Given the cost estimates that they have, that might be all the more that we can really do with that. We do have the $100,000 still set aside. Our goal was to try to work that in combination with, when we're looking at over on Fifth Street Alley, with improvements to the parking lot over there. So, we've got a few different moving parts there that we don't have final pieces on. We know that we have $100,000 we've set aside. We know that we'd look to try to use, I think that we have the ability, even though we'd look to fund the parking improvements, used up a lot of that funding on the other parking ramp, but we still have the ability to make that project happen. I think I gave Nick a $100,000 kind of, we could probably make happen this year if we needed to out of local option sales tax. But now you've got two different pieces. You've got an permeable pavement, and you've got the parking ramp. That's looking at a base level. I'd also like them to look at what's the cost estimate to put a second level on that. And Charlie also brought up the idea that they'd like to see potentially lighting in that alley that tied from Snake Alley down into the Jefferson Street area.
That'd be nice.
So there's another cost component that I don't have, and I told Charlie that you can put all this stuff out there. I don't know which ones we can all fund.
Yeah.
But
Well,
you may see some other components come up for at least discussion.
He's thinking and working, that's good.
No end to finding ways to spend money. I don't think any of us have problems with that, do we?
Speaking of that, well, I'll come back to it later. Any other questions about that?
No.
All right. We have two public hearings set for December 5th. One's consideration of ordinance amending various sections of Chapter 159 Mechanical Code, and a consideration of the sale of property locally known as 227 South 9th. Okay, and that takes care of the agenda. Anything else, Mr. Tisland? Ms. Wilson?
Good.
Mr. Scott?
I got a postcard from a person asking that we put out a memo or a press release about the boats being parked on the streets,
Oh, yeah.
boats and non-motorized trailers that after November 1st, they're supposed to be off the streets, and the chief's already sent me an email saying he's taking care of it. So.
Good.
But this just acts as another reminder to get them off the streets. We're gonna have snow, believe it or not. Eventually.
Say it's not so.
The new assistant city manager said, we're not gonna have any this year, so.
It's because he has to finish painting those snow plows. You can't,
He doesn't wanna get his snow plows dirty.
you can't ruin them now.
There's an inside joke going on back there, so I apologize for staff.
I guess. We're into the leaf pickup schedule, about halfway through, aren't we? Somewhere like that. So
Oh, wow.
it's going well, looks to me like, so.
Is there a leaf pickup next week, or do they take that week off and do the following?
They do not pick up the week of
Thanksgiving?
Thanksgiving.
No pickup
However,
the week of Thanksgiving.
There's a lot of leaves out there. We had a holiday Friday, so I think that it's possible,
want
I
one?
haven't heard an update, that they'll carry over into next week, just
Could-
trying to get caught up.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry, Don.
I know that I got some calls this weekend from people who were on Thursday's leaf route, saying, hey, they didn't pick up my leaves. The holiday had moved garbage forward, and well, we've had some personnel issues. I don't think we've had any equipment issues, but then there's a lot of leaves out there. So I know that they started today, Monday, on Thursday's leaf route. Of course, then they're supposed to be working on Fridays.
Right.
I don't know how far they got into it. Hopefully, we'll be caught up by the end of this week so that there will not be any leaf pickup during the holiday week for Thanksgiving. That was what's scheduled, is no leaf pickup. Well, we might find out that we haven't been able to get through all of the routes,
caught up,
and we
yeah.
might have a few bags that we'll have to be picking up next Monday. But that's not because we're wanting to do more, it's just that we're trying to get caught up, so.
Okay.
And then you have a final week of leaf pickup the week after Thanksgiving.
Yeah, there's a week after Thanksgiving, and then I believe there's the first week in
First
December as
I
well.
think so. Yeah, I think there's
Total
2
of
weeks.
7 weeks
I think there's 2
of
weeks.
actual pickup, so.
And the leaves have been later.
There,
coming
there's
down.
still a lot of trees out there
Oh,
that
yeah.
have a lot of leaves on them yet. There's areas where they're all down, and then there's other trees that they haven't really dropped much of anything, so.
Right.
They'll probably need that if it doesn't snow as is predicted, that'll probably benefit people who have late dropping trees.
Okay, I don't have anything else, Mr.
I have
Lefebvre.
nothing else.
Mr. Furneaux?
Really, the other area where we've got a significant amount of stuff going on is in Nick's area. You've got an RFQ that you put out. Yeah, why don't you go ahead and talk about where you're at with the Mount Pleasant Street Bridge, the RFQ on the next phase of Cascade, and then the integrated planning.
Yeah, we have a kickoff meeting this week with Stanley Consultants for Mount Pleasant Street Bridge. The same week, we were also doing interviews for 4 consultant firms on the sewer separation for Mazel. Upon selecting that firm, we will stick with them to initiate contracts for them to do design work on all of the Mazel separation process.
Makes sense.
So this will be a long-term separation process over the next 12 years, unless our consent decree is amended. We'll act as though it isn't. But we talked about a parking lot. We've got Agency Street. To discuss that a little bit, one of our former employees was at about 80% design on that. So rather than take that to a firm who's going to start from, scratch on the design work, was going to wait until we had our city engineer on board to allow them to do more design work. And now under our current structure where we have an engineering manager and then the city engineer, I hope that the city engineer can spend a lot more of his time doing design work rather than doing managerial type stuff.
Sounds good.
Yeah, there's a lot on the docket right now. We have an EPA meeting Thursday to discuss what the $150,000 in technical assistance means. I still don't think we have a clear understanding on how it's going to impact us. I think it's a good thing, but I also have been working on a sewer master plan RFQ, but I've put that on hold until I know what the EPA funding means with integrated planning. So That's all I can think of on my head.
You gotta love all this work, don't you?
You also asked a question a few weeks back about the trains. I've been hearing trains go off quite often lately, and I don't know if they're within the quiet zone area or if they're Amtrak or not. But I did call Amtrak and I haven't gotten a response back. Doesn't surprise me, but.
Right, that's not surprising.
You also asked a question a few weeks back about the speed on Curran. After looking at it, if we would like to do something, my recommendation would be between the overpass to Agency Street. It's a little less residential than between Mount Pleasant
Right.
and the overpass. The current speed is 25.
Right.
I don't know if there's a reason why, because of the school there.
I'm sure that was why.
Plus the residential on the north side, that's
The
pretty
school, I'm
typical.
sure, was in-
Yeah.
I think bumping it up to potentially 30 would be within realm of reason, between the overpass to Agency. But the rest of it is 25.
I guess
so-
the question would be whether it'd be worth it just for basically 2 blocks.
So, if that's something you want me to work on, I can, but I didn't know where we stood, so I thought I'd bring it back to you, but.
I don't know.
No, not if it's not that whole section.
Yeah,
Just
I would think not.
seems like a waste of your time.
Yeah, I agree. I think you're right.
We have higher priorities.
Thank you, Nick.
Yeah, the meeting on Thursday with integrated planning, I think that's all 5 communities at one time.
Yeah.
So it's really an initial conversation as they kick off and
Just like a
start.
webinar or something?
We're not, yeah, it's a
Yeah,
conference call. We have no idea what to expect out of this.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of work going on in the sewer and from the engineering side. I'm sorry, Bob, I'm
Oh,
making you
pardon me,
stay a
I'm
little
sorry.
bit longer.
Don't laugh, this is serious.
I know, and I just lost where I was going. We are, as you mentioned, Agency Street, we're way behind on the work that we'd had on board to try to get done through the engineering department. And we're trying to do an awful lot of work in-house, and we were already behind because we weren't having enough of it shipped out and having other firms do that. And that was not helped by having such a major transition in staff this summer. But as we move forward with, we're gonna have a lot more work that we're gonna be outsourcing, and you're gonna see it reflected as we're looking at an outside engineering firm to do the sewer separation work now for the next section.
I'm sorry. One area that hasn't ever been discussed since I've been here has been the vineyard area. After we select the separation firm, I think, Jim and I have had the conversation, we think that would be a good area for them to also take an assessment of. In the loss of staff, that was something we had planned for this fall, to go out and do survey work so they could have a better estimate on what the cost would be to do the work in that area. Unfortunately, we just didn't have the ability to do that. So I think if we were to try and come up with a scope of services on what we wanted them to do, I think that the separation firm would be someone to look at doing that.
Okay.
Get a little
Great.
handsy.
Thank you, Nick.
That is all I had.
Is that it?
Yes, it is.
Except we're heading into budget season.
Except for heading into budget season, yes, they got forms the end of last week? Today. So the department heads know that we're meeting this week of December 5th. Well, that's the same week, but, for presentation from the department heads to Stephanie and I with, their operating budgets and capital projects. So we should be on pace to make we've got a budget calendar for the new year, with meetings beginning somewhere, I assume, around January 8th. So
Happy day.
it's all fun.
We done, folks? We done? Thank you, everybody. You want to adjourn?
Just so you know, I had the